Well, as I mentioned, we are in this series. This is part 2 of our 5-part series that we want to try to make the case that we can know that Jesus is alive. And so we're spelling out this word alive. I can know Jesus is alive because of, and we're looking at 5 different pieces of evidence. Now, last week, we looked at the story of a man named Paul, and we looked at the conclusion, especially of his remarks to a group of philosophers. And at the end of his remarks, as he was wrapping them up, he talked about his faith and his belief in the fact that Jesus had not only died, but that he had been resurrected back to life. And the response of these philosophers was probably very typical to a response of a lot of people today. The historical account says that some people sneered. They laughed. They're like, really? Resurrection from the dead? What kind of fairy tale are you talking about here? Some people didn't really make a decision quite yet. They said, hey, Paul, we'd like to hear a little bit more about this. And then there were some people as well that said, after hearing the way of what you've presented to us, we believe that what you said is true, that there was this man, Jesus, who died and was raised back to life. But I'm interested in, as well, in how he even got the invitation to come and speak to this group of philosophers in Athens. This was not a place where just anybody could just walk in and make a presentation. You had to get an invitation to be able to come there. These were the elite group, at least they thought so, the elite group of the day, and they thought that they were the ones that kind of could think on the higher levels than anybody else and then tell people, here's what we think and here's how we're supposed to process this. Now, there was 2 main schools of philosophy in Athens. There were a group of people that were called the Epicureans. The Epicureans had no use for religion at all. They thought religion was just for weak-minded people who were superstitious and insecure, and they needed some kind of thing to try to hold on to, and so they would create a religion. And so the Epicureans just wanted to have nothing to do with anything that sounded religious. The other group was almost the opposite. They were called the Stoics. And the Stoics believed that you could find God, but you could find him everywhere. He was in everything. He was all over the place. And as a result, then, the Stoics would have really 2 ways that they lived that out. One was, because God is everywhere, we can just kind of do whatever we want. We can live however we want to. And then there was another group of the Stoics that would say, well, because God is everywhere and we want to be careful we don't offend him, we need to be very careful about how we live. And so they would have like weird things that you can't eat or can't drink or can't do. Okay, so you got these 2 totally separate groups. There is no God, or there is God everywhere. And onto that scene comes Paul, and he's just hanging out in the marketplace. He's just going around talking to people just on the street corners about his belief in Jesus. That here's this great man that was fully man, fully God, that he had died and he had been resurrected back to life. And so it says, a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with Paul. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. That's what kind of caught their attention. Then they took him and they brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean. Especially like those phrases there, new teaching and strange ideas. Now that seems kind of funny coming from them, because if anybody was coming up with new ideas and strange teachings and weird thoughts, it was these philosophers already. In fact, Luke even adds a little parentheses in there and says, these guys just like to sit around all day and just talk about the latest and greatest things. They were always coming up with something. But here's this guy, and so I guess it's a little bit of a compliment for them to say, these are strange things that you're saying to us. Well, there was a man named Anthony Flew that in 2004, he said something that was very strange to the ears of the people who had come to follow him and really cling to some of the thoughts that he was sharing. Anthony Flew, at that time, was 81 years old, and he had made quite a reputation for himself as a renowned atheist. Worldwide, he had worldwide recognition. People knew his writings. Interestingly, one of the very first essays that he read publicly in front of a group of people about atheism was at a place called the Socratic Club on the campus of Magdalen College, where C.S. Lewis, who's at that time already had a pretty famous reputation as well as a Christian apologist, he was serving as the chairman, and Anthony Flew comes in as a young man and reads his essay about atheism. And as time went on, he built on his arguments and he strengthened those, and was quite persuasive for a lot of people, and adamant in his belief there is no God. But in 2004, he said, I have to go where the evidence leads me. And the evidence leads me to conclude that I was wrong, that there is a God. That there is a God. Now, he didn't say if that God has a name. He didn't say, so some people say, want to make the argument, well, he didn't become a Christian. Well, you're right, he didn't. He just went from being an atheist, that little letter A at the beginning means there is nothing there. That means no, there is no God, to there is a God. And he said, I just have to go where the arguments have taken me. Now, what was interesting is that he made this comment in his book called, by that name, There Is a God. He said, my discovery of the divine has been a pilgrimage of reason and not of faith. In other words, it made sense to my head. I tried to set my emotions aside. I wanted to look at this, just analyze it like a scientist. I wanted to be very cold and calculating, and so I wasn't going, oh, my heart wants this to be true. He said, the arguments logically make sense to me. And so I just had to follow those arguments where they were going. And so my pilgrimage to this spot of going from there is no God to there is a God has been one of reason. And that's the reason why last week, when we started this series, I Can Know Jesus is Alive, because of the first letter, A, that we looked at was apologetics. We wanted to present reasoned facts. We wanted to present evidence that somebody could just coldly look at as a scientist or as a member of a jury that's weighing the evidence that's being presented, just looking at some of the facts and saying, does this make sense? Does this make more sense? Is this logical to follow this? Because just as Anthony Flew said, that's how his journey went, was because those facts and those arguments began to speak to his logical mind. Now, that is one way that people can know that Jesus is alive, but it doesn't just stop in our minds. It's not just a logical proposition, but for some people as well, what the letter L speaks to them is that we can know that Jesus is alive because we can see lives that are changed. Lives that go a different direction because of their encounter with Jesus, who was risen from the dead. Now, we read this story here. We kind of looked at the beginning and the end of Paul, how he got the invitation to come speak to these philosophers, and then his laying out, here's what I believe, and then we see the conclusion at the end of people going, some of them sneering, some of them saying we want to hear more, and some believing in what he said. But I want to back up even farther than even the invitation. How did Paul even get to this part? How did he even get to Athens and have these kind of conversations in the marketplace that would catch the ears of these philosophers to go, hey, this is a strange idea. This is a new concept we haven't heard before, and we need to talk to you a little bit more about this. How did he even get there? Well, when he was born, Paul was not his birth name. His birth name was Saul. And he listed some of his qualifications, if you will. He kind of listed his resume, and he had a world-class resume. He had a resume that made him the envy of all of the other people that were around him. First of all, he was this is kind of his terminology, but it's terminology that was well known during his culture, to say that he was an Israelite of the first order, meaning that as far back as you could trace his family line, it was pure Jewish blood. There wasn't any intermarrying somewhere else with other cultures. There was no skeletons in the closet. There was no like sketchy things in his past genealogy. He said, if you follow my father's genealogy, if you follow my mother's genealogy, if you look at our family tree, I can state that I'm an Israelite of the first order. There is 100% Israelite blood in my body. It's not mingled with anything else. Now, this was an important thing for Jews, because Jewish men used to pray in their prayer every day. One of the things that they said in their prayer was, they say, God, I thank you that you didn't make me a Gentile. They thought that this was it, that the Israelite people were it, and nobody else could get close to God but them. And so for him to say, I'm an Israelite of the first order, means that there's not a drop of anything inside of me that would even remotely put me on the outside with you. I am an Israelite through and through. He also pointed out that he was from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, Benjamin is a significant tribe because it's from this tribe that Israel got its very first king, whose name was also Saul. So Saul, the Israelite of the first order, was named after the first king of Israel as well. So there was something even in his parents naming him that, with this kind of expectation. Not only is an Israelite of the first order, but we expect greatness out of our son. And so all through his life, even though he wasn't born in Jerusalem, he was born in a different city. Early on in his life, he was sent to Jerusalem so that he could train under Gamaliel, who was one of the best known teachers for religious pursuits in that time. His name was well known. Paul also called himself a Hebrew of Hebrews. He said, not only is the blood in my body pure, but the way that I have carried out my religion has been pure as well. And so he said, if you think of the Israelites as being this exclusive group among the rest of the people of the world, I'm in the cream of the crop of that group as well. I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. He was also, in his religious pursuit, he was a part of the most strict religious order that were called the Pharisees. Now, even if you didn't know anything about Pharisees and you were just transported back to first century Jerusalem, you would be, in really short order, you would be able to identify the Pharisees, because there was something different about them. They dressed differently, they talked differently, they walked differently, and everybody in the city knew, because when they would walk down the street, the people would part. Everybody gave way to the Pharisees when they were coming down, because the way that they were dressed, there was no doubt that this was a religious man of the first order, of the most strict and stringent religious code, and everybody would step aside, everybody would defer to them. Now, these Pharisees, they prided themselves on not only knowing the law of Moses that was given in the Torah inside out and backwards, but they also came up with their own rules as well. For instance, one of the 10 Commandments says, honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, later on, Moses said, I want to clarify that a little bit. On the Sabbath day, the way that you honor it is you don't do any ordinary work on the Sabbath day. The Pharisees sat down and deliberated. What is ordinary work? What are we supposed to be doing? And they would develop, for instance, on just this one commandment alone, they might have 70 different rules that they would follow. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath day holy? They would have it down to what kind of food you could prepare, how you took care of your fire in your house, how many steps you could walk during the day, what kind of grooming practices you could or couldn't do on that day. They even thought about what happens if your house caught fire on a Sabbath day. What were you supposed to do then? And knowing all of those commandments that Moses gave, and then all of the Pharisees' rules, Paul could still make this statement: I am faultlessly legalistic. Every one of not only the commands that God gave to Moses, but every one of the rules that the Pharisees have come up with, I follow all those too. I've crossed every T, dotted every I. So you're talking about a guy here, he says, whether you want to look at my DNA, whether you want to look at my religious training, or whether you want to look at the way that I have lived it out in my life, you're not going to find any error in me. You're not going to find any smudge anyplace. I am about as close to perfect as I could be. That's his resume. He said, try to punch a hole in it. Try to find a problem with this. Now, the Pharisees, because they say that there is only one God, in fact, that's how the Ten Commandments start off, is this reminder: there is one and only one God. You can imagine why they responded the way that they did when Jesus comes on the scene, and the way that he starts teaching and the miracles that he's doing start raising questions in people's minds that are watching this. Could this be the Messiah? Could this be the Son of God? Which means he could be God himself. And so when they finally get him, just in this week that we're getting ready to celebrate, when Good Friday, when they finally get him in front and they say, answer us straight up, yes or no, are you the Son of God? And he says, yes, it's true. They took those robes that so distinguished them as Pharisees and set them apart and ripped that robe open and said, blasphemy, blasphemy. We don't even have to hear anything else. We've heard it. And they got him to Pilate so that they could have him crucified. And then they began to crucify all of his followers, especially these weird people that not only believed that Jesus was God, but they believed that he came back to life as well after they had him crucified. And they began going after him. And Paul even writes, as he's telling people, he says, I hounded these people to their death at times. I went after them because I was so perfect, and I wanted this pursuit of God to be so perfect for everybody else. If anybody was saying this Jesus guy was a god, I'm going after them because they are messing up this pure religion that we have. But then Paul tells the story of what happened to himself one day as he is on his way to harass some more of these Christians. He said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, he was in Jerusalem at the time. Under Gamaliel, I was thoroughly trained in the law of our fathers and was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as also the high priests and all the council can testify. I even obtained letters from them to their brothers in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and I heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, the God of our fathers has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear the words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all men of what you have seen and heard. Now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name. Saul was not convinced that Jesus was who he said he was, nor that he had died and was risen from the dead by some argument. As Anthony Flew said, I wasn't convinced by my reason. I was convinced because I met Jesus personally. He spoke directly to me and called me by name. And so as a result of that, he changed his name. He no longer went by the name Saul. He began to call himself Paul. His life was going in a completely different direction than it had started going. Now, remember, at the time that he has this encounter with Jesus, he is on his way to persecute and perhaps even kill people who are followers of Jesus. Now, when somebody who is on the team, so to speak, for the Pharisees, and they leave the team and they're playing for the rival team, you don't expect them to just go, Saul left us, no big deal. This was one of their most outspoken, most eloquent, most forceful speakers that they had. They now went after him with all that they had. And so Saul, who became Paul, is now persecuted by the very Jews that he began to work, that he had worked with before. They now flip the argument around, and they're coming right back at him the same way that he had gone after the other Christians. He had multiple opportunities standing in front of them when he could have recanted. There were times that these Jews would come into a city and they would so stir the crowds up into a mob that was out of control that there were times that literally Paul's physical body could have been ripped apart from limb to limb. It could have been a lynching had he not had some friends that got him out of there. One time, they even got the crowd, before Paul could get rescued by his friends, they stoned him and thought that they had killed him, and they just left him laying outside the city at night, and they left. They said, well, we took care of that. They went in, but Saul got up and walked away from that. Multiple opportunities that he could have said, no, this is, I was just kidding around. I didn't really happen. I didn't. Jesus, yeah, he was, sure. Yeah, he was not the guy that I've been saying that he is. Multiple opportunities with the Jews that he could have done that. But right around the same time as well, as the Roman emperors were becoming more full of themselves, they started having all of their followers and everybody in the Roman world say this phrase, Caesar is Lord. Well, you can see where that might be a little bit of a problem for Christians that claim Jesus is Lord. And so not only was Paul persecuted by the Jews, but he was persecuted by the Romans as well. In fact, Paul's life even ended by execution under Emperor Nero while he was in Rome. All these times that Paul could have recanted, could have backed down, but he said, this encounter that I've had with Jesus is real, it's changed my life, and I'm willing to die for it. Walked away from the resume of resumes, something that could have put him on the path to easily becoming the high priest, put him in a prominent member of the Sanhedrin, the ruling power of for the Jewish people. Walked away from all of that because he knew that who he had encountered in the person of Jesus was real. Here's Paul's response to all of this. He said, the very credentials these people are waving around as something special, in other words, their resume, I'm tearing it up and throwing it out with the trash, along with everything else I used to take credit for. And why? Because of Christ. Yes, all the things I once thought were so important are gone from my life. Compared to the high privilege of knowing Christ Jesus as my master firsthand, everything I once thought I had going for me is insignificant. Dog dung. I've dumped it all in the trash so that I can embrace Christ and be embraced by Him. I'm giving it all up because I know what the value is. I know that it's real. Lives have been changed because they've encountered Jesus. Lives are still being changed. Sometimes it is somebody that is prominent as a Saul that becomes a Paul. Sometimes it's somebody that has worldwide name recognition like an Anthony Flew. And when he makes his declaration that there is a God, people just are coming apart because they can't believe that their hero, their atheist hero, would say this. And sometimes the peoples whose lives are changed by Jesus are virtually unknown outside of their circle of family and friends and co-workers. But the life change is no less real, and it's no less important than anybody else. I want one person that has had their life changed by Jesus to tell you his story about a life that is different because he encountered Jesus. It is.
Good morning. I'm just so excited. I'm enthused because of the things that Jesus has done in me. I know that Jesus Christ is alive. I can attest this by telling you some things that He has changed in me just within the last 4.5 years. There was a time when I wasn't drinking a case. I was drinking cases of beer every week. One, I depended on it. Two, I liked the taste. I liked the taste of beer. I didn't think it was an issue for me. I had been training myself for these days for years, not knowing what it was leading to, but I had drank probably 35 years prior to this moment of knowing, wow, I do have an issue with beer. It started out watching parents abuse alcohol, other things in the home, me trying it, liking it, and it just started progressing. After me and Patty had moved here to Cedar Springs, when we bought the house, I had to make sure that I had a beer fridge in the garage, which was stocked full. Every day, there was never a time I didn't have 2 or more cases of beer in my fridge. Not for show, not for anything. Nobody had to know that I had it there, but that was my drink of choice. Pop, anything else, nothing. I would typically come home off a 5-day work week, drinking anywhere between 8 to 12 beers a day. I went to work at 5, got home by 6 o'clock at night. I didn't eat dinner. I drank my dinner, 8 to 12 every night. And then came the weekends, where I'm drinking 12 or more every day. And it didn't start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It started around 9, 10 in the morning. So Patty never really pushed anything about, hey, you're drinking way too much, or this. She would just hint once in a while, hey, that's quite a bit, you've been drinking lately. But I'm like, I like the taste. Don't worry about it, I'm fine. Well, I'm not trying to tell you I have an issue with it, but I knew she was. But, so, after years and years of very much so enjoying my beer, tasting, I just loved it. We had started going to, it was the first Sunday. God just works in amazing ways. Pastor Owens had known my wife prior to knowing me through stuff through the city and everything else like that, and had become friends along with another individual. And it just so happened I don't like Christmas shopping. I don't go to malls. I don't like doing any of that. Well, this other friend of ours ran into me at the mall, he also does not like going. Said, hey, I don't know, we have been going through some stuff with the city, and he said, hey, I'd like to invite you to church. No pressure, no worries, but I know this pastor who's very good, and he'd be more than willing to talk to you guys and help if you need it. Awesome. So I really didn't think too much about it, and Patty had talked to Pastor, and it just happened that it was an invite about almost the same exact time as when I was invited by Charlie. And so we walked into church on a Sunday, and as we walked through the back door, I'm looking around and I'm like, this is the place. This is where we need to be. And Patty's like, oh, absolutely. So I never asked Pastor to pray for me. I never prayed to God that he would take alcohol away from me. I didn't want him to. I wanted it. I loved it. Within a 2-week span, from going from drinking cases of beer a week to drinking none. Within 2 weeks, he took that craving of beer. I didn't want beer. I didn't like the smell of it. Didn't want to taste it. It was gone from me. Again, I didn't ask for it. I didn't pray for it. I didn't ask anybody else to pray for it. Jesus Christ took that from me because he had bigger, better plans for me. By me, without even me asking or understanding why, all I did was I trusted it. And he has propelled me into many, many different areas and different things that I've been wanting to do or wanting to try to do. And he's put me in those places to be able to succeed, putting me in spots where I can be helped. And one other little story. So we're here on Sunday, and Pastor was reading through Corinthians chapter 13. It's called the love chapter. I've heard this many, many times before. This is the love chapter, and I'm like, yeah, love, love, love. Really, I'm like, I don't like this because it made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what love was, and I was afraid to know what it was. In my household, we didn't show love. It wasn't said to anybody. My dad wasn't one of those guys that said, oh, I love you, son, give me a hug. No, we didn't do that. We showed love in very odd, weird ways, as in a punch or something else. That if you couldn't get some acceptance or anything by one way, you're going to do something to get attention and that love in a different way. And that's what us three boys were really good at, getting it the other way. Well, growing up and everything, I started dating, met my wife. I believe I loved her the way, it was puppy love and all that, but as I grew and to mature, I had that mature love for her. But for anybody outside of Patty or my children, people would say they love me. They would come up, give me a hug, oh yeah, I love you too. I meant nothing by it. It didn't mean anything to me because, one, I don't know you well enough to say I love you, and two, I don't. So I just don't love you. Well, we were doing some things with some friends over a week, or it was quite a few weeks, and one of Patty's girlfriends, she was so excited and bubbly all the time, and I did like this individual, and she kept saying, oh, Scott, we love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And one night, I stopped her. I said, you need to stop saying that. You throw it around like it's nothing. And I had never felt what real love was. An intimate type of love that a child would share with his father or his mom, because I just didn't have that connection with anybody. And so I'm like, you throw that word around like it doesn't mean anything at all to you. And I said, I can't tell you I love you because I don't. I don't know you. I don't just go around telling people I love you because, again, I just didn't. So and I held that word love in very high esteem because there were so many people, there was only a very few amount of people, 4 that I could think of, my 3 kids and my wife, that I felt that for, and I could feel safe enough to say, I love you, and be able to get that love back, that vulnerability of being turned away. So here comes the pastor, heard Corinthians, my word, love thing. So I'm sitting back there, and I'm listening. And I'm listening, and I'm listening. And I had gone home, and I asked Jesus, I said, Lord, this whole love thing, I don't understand it, I don't get it. But I want it, because I had seen the unselfishness, the unconditional love that people can have for somebody else. That they really don't even know themselves, but yet they can still say, I love you, and actually mean it. It's not like, oh, I love you, yep, I love you too, and then take a hike. They really meant it, and they really felt it. And it was the point in my life where I wanted to feel this too. I just didn't know how to get it. So that night I had gone home, and I had started praying for Jesus to show me this love. I wanted it. See, God gave us a free will. God's not going to make us do something that we don't want to do. We have to ask for it. We want it. Then He will give you. I'm asking. I was praying for it. I prayed for it for, I think it was a little over a week. I was reading over chapter 13, just kept reading through it all week long. On my way to work, because I would listen to praise and worship, and I'd be praising God, worshiping God as I'm on my way into work. So this particular morning, I'm on my way into work, and I'm praying in the Spirit, and I said, Father, I thank you for everything you've done for me. Can you please, I'm searching, I want to feel this love, I want to know what this love is. And I started praying in the Spirit again, and all of a sudden, it just, I can't describe it. It was just a wave of emotion that went from I felt the emotion. It wasn't like a tingly feeling. I felt the love, and it started literally at the top of my head and worked its way down to my feet and then back all the way back up. And I am weeping like a girl. That's not what guys do. They don't do that. I was grown. I was in a generation. Guys don't cry. That's vulnerability. But Jesus was showing me vulnerability, that what he was able to do on the cross for me. He gave me that same passion, that same love, that unconditional love that he had for me. Why shouldn't I be able to do the same thing for somebody else and be able to give that love, show that love, give it, and not just give it, honor it. Honor that love that he shed on the cross for me. And that love, that day, had provided paths for me to do many different things. One, in helping a very dear friend of ours, Lazaro Villanueva, here at church. That unconditional love, that willing to be able to get messy, because I did literally and figuratively love Larry Lazaro like a brother. Helped me to be able to do things for him that I would never have been able to do before, which ended up leading up into the last final thing that I was able to do was to be able to help my biological mom. As she was passing away, I was able to stay with her until she passed away at our house, or at her house. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that without that love, without those steps of helping Larry and helping other people do things, learning how to be unselfish, was able to lead me to be able to spend the last week of my mom's life with her, helping her, gaining a relationship back that I so much needed from her, that I never had before, and to be at peace. When she passed, I was relieved that she had passed, no more pain. But the biggest thing was, I walked away from that week was, we were good. We were a mother and a son that had that perfect relationship for 1 week of our lives, that she wanted and I wanted. Without Jesus Christ showing me that love, giving me that gift, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't be able to be up here today giving you this testimony. I wouldn't be able to be doing some of the things that I'm doing now in this church, helping my pastor, helping brothers and sisters here in our church, that I so freely love to do. Literally, I love to be able to help. Us guys, we do a lot of joking and kidding, but they know me, they know my heart. Some of the ladies that are here, they know me well enough, and they know my heart well enough. I would sacrifice anything that would make me gain anything. I would lift them up before I would lift me up. And that's all out of love that Jesus Christ has given to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to ask you the same question that I concluded with last week. After you hear that, what's your conclusion? People that Paul spoke to there at the Areopagus, some of them sneered, some of them said, I want to hear more, and some of them said, I'm convinced this is real. Would you just bow your heads with me for just a moment? You might be here today, and maybe you're in the camp of an Anthony Flew, that you said, there is no God. Kind of like those Epicurean philosophers as well, that said that that's just something that people make up just to make themselves feel better. And maybe like Anthony Flew, maybe there's something that speaks to your head. Or maybe like Saul, who became Paul, or Scott, maybe there's something that speaks to your heart. But you're at least willing to acknowledge today that there is a God. There's a God that's not distant, but a God that loves. A God that cares about me personally. And if that's you, if that's the camp that you fall into today, that's your conclusion, I want to just challenge you to take one step more. And that is to ask Jesus to reveal himself to you. As you pray a very simple prayer to just invite him to come into your life. I'm going to lead the prayer. There's nothing magical about the words that I'm going to say. God just wants to hear from you. And so just use my prayer to form your own prayer. And just say something like this. God, I know that you love me. And I know that I need that love. I'm separated from you. I've been trying to find you through a whole bunch of different avenues, or maybe I've just even been trying to ignore that you even exist. But I acknowledge you are there. And you're not some distant deity that we can't get to. You love me. You proved it by sending your one and only Son to come here, to die on a cross, to pay the penalty for all of my attempts of trying to stay away from you. But God, you further proved your love and your power by not allowing Jesus to remain in the grave, but you brought him back. You resurrected him to life to show me that I too can live for an eternity with you. And so, God, I welcome you into my life today. Ask you to forgive me of those sins of ignoring you and turning my back on you and shutting you out of my life. And from this day forward, I want Jesus to be my Savior, my Lord, and I want my life to count for something. I want my life to be different now because I have encountered you. Thank you, Jesus, for what you did for me on the cross. Thank you for coming into my life. Amen. Let us